which also democratizes caste, because now it's an associational formation where people choose to join caste association, they are not born into it. So I think that in some sense becomes the kind of model through which then political scientists and sociologists and people doing political sociology begin to talk about caste and democracy, that now you have kind of horizontal mobilizations, different communities are not in some sense vertically structured, they are competing with each other. And whenever there is competition, there is some sense of equality, and it basically numbers become more important. And if Dalits can mobilize themselves, Kashiram and Mayawati can also form a government. So Kashiram and Mayawati are as equal as Yadavs, Yadavs are as equal as Rajputs, Rajputs are as equal as Thakur. So there is no hierarchy of caste left any longer, and caste and democracy in some sense can reinforce each other at some level. But in this process of reinforcing each other, you have a new kind of what we call as Indian modernity emerging, where you have different kind of collective formations. And actually, Kothari went on to use the word civil society for caste association, that how this in some sense becomes a kind of plane on which one can think about India's political modernity, Indian democracy, without really thinking about caste. And therefore, the old kind of formulation which talked about modernization as moving from caste to class was forgotten, and one could think of, in some sense, a new kind of modernization where caste itself becomes a modern reality, but as modern reality, it is only a pressure group. It's not really, in that sense, a kind of hierarchical structure which inhibits development of caste. And I think this formulation of caste, starting with Rudolphs and Kothari and many other political scientists have actually subscribed to it or assumed that this is working. It's classical functionist political sociology. The classical functionist of political sociology assumes a kind of what we, I think, in that book with James Vanner we have described as imperative or disappearance. That caste has no future. Caste will eventually disappear, and it is already disappearing. And this is not really the hierarchy of caste that we talk about. You don't really have to worry about it. This is in some sense already gone. So democracy is taking care of caste. Democracy in some sense getting over the hierarchies of caste. Now, I started by questioning this formulation and by saying that this is in some sense very impressionistic understanding, and that is my problem with lots of social science theory that gets done by professional theoreticians, and it happens much more in countries like India. And I would say that there is some element of what one would call as armchair Brahminism, which operates in theorization in India. I'm not talking about political scientists, I'm talking about theorization in general, where you think of empirical as being evident as it is presented in newspapers or television debates. The empirical on ground has much more subtle variations, and those variations then require engagement with that empirical. And I'm reminded of what Gopal Guru had once called as theoretical Brahmins and empirical Shudras. And there is this kind of caste division within that social science formulation, where those who do empirical work, they are supposed to be looking at subtle reality on the ground, but that's empirical, right? Theoreticians don't need to worry about the empirical. They need to read Western literature, they need to kind of think of logic and think of philosophical formulations and language, some of the things that were being talked about in the previous session as well. So I think that is what has happened to caste as well. Those who talk about caste and democracy or theorization of caste, most of it is based on very impressionistic understanding of caste. For example, the word Dalit, many people think of Dalit as caste category. Dalit is not a caste category. This is a modern mobilization of a cluster of communities which became possible only with enumeration during the 20th century, when the Britishers invented a pollution line. Scheduled caste is not a caste category. They would plug these hundreds of communities into one category and then they'll say, look, there is hierarchy among them as well. But they're not one caste. But they assume that Dalit is a caste category. Economists use SC/ST as one caste category, OBC as second caste category, and general as third category as caste. Now these are formations of the modern state. One can use them meaningfully, but this is not caste. When one is talking about caste, if one has to, I think Mr. Vivek Kumar was trying to kind of point to this vagueness and openness about the reality of caste and the way in which it has been kind of different people have conceptualized it differently. In my understanding, if one has to think about caste and in the present day reality of caste, nobody would deny that caste does not exist. Caste exists in JNU, caste exists in Basantpur, caste exists in village, Jahanabad, or even in Silicon Valley, right? Everyone says that. But how do we access it? I think the three different aspects of caste which need to be given centrality that I've written on it. One is that caste is about hierarchy. And I think hierarchy is a value, it's also practice, it's a structure. There are many things about hierarchy. It also goes with ascription. Hierarchy could be also based on class, it could be based on another. But ascription is a very critical element of caste. The moment we use the word ascription, we talk about the language of theory, it helps us to think of caste comparatively. And the third, very, very important, most important part that Mr. Vivek Kumar was pointing to is that caste is about denial. It's about denial / exclusion / privilege / humiliation, right? So that is what in some sense becomes the structural marker of caste, that caste is. So if one has to think about caste that way, the moment we think about caste, the first thing that it produces is a structure of inequality, right? In the functionalist political sociology of caste, inequality is forgotten. Simply because you can contest elections and you can mobilize your numbers and you can form government by BSP doesn't mean that inequality goes away. Inequality is material inequality. It's not simply a question of the psychic inequality. Inequality means resources. You have them, you don't have them, right? So that is where I think the first, what one should say, implication of the existence of caste is a kind of structure of inequality, which is durable, which is written, which is being talked about all over the world, which is ascription based, which is again also communitarian. It's not class. And this inequality is not inequality in the sense in which Newmo and Orientalists are talking about. This is inequality of power and powerlessness. And powerlessness comes in a variety of different ways, and it in some sense needs to be then operationalized. And when you operationalize this, there is nothing called caste that exists on the ground. What you have on the ground are different kind of groupings which have historically involved in that region. We call them jatis, we call them zards. There are different ways in which they are made. Not that caste does not exist. Caste is a theoretical category through which we can look at description-based hierarchies which are embedded with humiliation and sense of pride and privilege. And on ground, you don't have a caste. On ground, you have cluster of communities, and these clusters of communities are hierarchically structured. These clusters of communities are ascription-based. These clusters of communities are communitarian in the sense that they're collective. They would also be living together, they exchange, and then marriage becomes the most important medium through which reproduction of those clusters of hierarchy happen. And I think if one was to think of this reality of caste, and then bring in people like Kashiram and Ambedkar, when they are trying to engage with caste, who needs democracy? I think this was a question raised by Javed Alam. When we think about democracy and caste, who needs democracy? Like when Rajni Kothari was talking about caste, when Rudolph were talking about caste, they were only talking about the village dominant caste communities who were only dominant coming into electoral democracy. They were not dealing with the reality of caste, which produces opposite of democracy, and that is exclusion, right? They were talking about new groups joining the caste who are in some sense competing with the traditional professionals who were leaders of India's freedom movement. And they were very happy that these Jats are able to come into politics, Reddys are able to come into politics. But they were already in politics. They are the ones who were dominant at the local level. They are the ones who were landed people. None of them studied Dalits, right? Dalit political agency emerges only in the 1990s. It is not there in the 60s. It is not there in the 80s also. It's only in the 90s when you have new kind of quota middle class emerging at the national level, and that's where the word Dalit becomes very critical. So Dalit is a construct. Even though Ambedkar talks about it, you have Dalit Panthers in Maharashtra, you have different kind of Dalit kind of formations in different regions of India. I still have 4 minutes, I'll complete in 4 minutes. Different kinds of caste formations, collective formations are different, but the word Dalit becomes popular only in the 90s. And this is how it begins to be mobilized. It starts its mobilization not from the village. It starts its mobilization from the office. Right? And this quota middle class, emergence of quota middle class is a historical product. Kashiram is a Punjabi, Ramdas is a Sikh, born and grown up in Rupert district of Punjab with slightly well-to-do family, not very well-to-do, but he's a tall, fair man. Right? He doesn't look like a Dalit. You can say that to Vivek Kumar side that BSK actually had to issue kind of clarification that he actually is from a scheduled caste. Because nobody thought he was Dalit when he came to that Delhi, was his retirement. In Pune also, when he discovers his Dalitness, nobody thought he was Dalit. And it was his position in the office that made him angry. That I am a scheduled caste and there's another person who is scheduled caste who has nothing to do with him, not from this community, that he begins to identify with his suspension because he is demanding holiday on Ambedkar's birthday. And that's where Maharashtra becomes very critical and Bamsat becomes very critical. That's where the notion of Dalit begins to be mobilized. And I think Kashiram then spent a lot of time thinking about it, and that's where he goes to 1942 Ambedkar and Pune Pact, and where he thought that there was a historic compromise. Now we all think of reservation as being given to scheduled caste. It was Gandhi's compromise. Ambedkar was not particularly happy with reservation. He wanted separate electorates. And that's why Kashiram's book, Chamcha A, basically says that reservation has only produced chamchas. And they are not really representative of our community, and we need to mobilize as community. And then his challenge was the same as challenge of Gandhi, and that was demographic challenge. How you produce a number. Gandhi was worried about producing a Hindu as number, and that's why he wanted Ambedkar to kind of say that scheduled caste are Hindus, and they don't want separate electorates. Ambedkar and Kashiram wanted, in some sense, separate electorates, and Kashiram was more interested in in numbers, and he worked out this formula that if we were to also invoke the idea of OBC, and lower OBCs particularly would identify with Dalits because their situation is very close to Dalits, but he was thinking politically. He was not thinking in terms of ground sociological realities and political theories. He was thinking of how to build alliance by adding different groups, and that could add up to 50% plus, and that's why the word that he uses is Bahujan. He's very allergic to the word Dalit. He actually doesn't like the word Dalit because Dalits will have to move out of Dalitness if they want to have a Bahujan kind of politics, which would become ruling politics of the region, and that would bring about. Now, this was a very interesting kind of move, and he himself, along with the larger quota middle class, Mamsef and many other people who had become officers through reservations, and he was able to kind of give them this moral call of giving back, that you are there because of the community. If reservation was not there, you could not have become officer. You need to give back to the community. And that was the guilt that he was able to infuse in this quota middle class. I'm using the word quota middle class very self-consciously because these were all, more or less everyone had been able to get into jobs because of reservations. And that was the ground on which he could mobilize all of them and make them feel ashamed of themselves, and they then began to invest their resources, and you have emergence of some kind of Dalit politics, which he thought that we need to start with our own kind of mobilization. Only then we can have Bahujan identity at the second level. And I think that was lost. And this is my final point. And that was lost because they came to power. And they came to power, his politics was based on the notion of hissedari. Hissedari was very central to his notion of politics, that we need our share in representation. His politics remained representational, and he foregrounded the question of representation. Not that Kashiram did not have ideology, he had a transformative agenda, and he kind of articulates it in a variety of different ways. He also did not really theorize as much as Ambedkar was able to do, he did not write as much as, but his conversations are very interesting if you kind of put them together. He had a theoretical vision, but somehow, once they came to power, this additive politics of hissedari then he gets reduced to, in some sense, representational politics of jatis. And this representational politics of jatis becomes a kind of norm for politics to do in states like UP and elsewhere. And this is my last point, where inequality of caste becomes very critical again. Who has the resources? Now, representational politics, it was, I think, from Mayawati that BJP and Amit Shah were able to pick up this idea of representational politics, and then they began to offer hissedari to those concrete empirical units of caste, which are jatis and upjatis. That you don't need to have Dalit identity, and this is something that Mayawati was also finding very difficult, that how to bring in quote-unquote Valmikis and Vidyatars and their various communities, because the entire narrative of new politics, Dalit politics, is that of communities. And that's where she wants to bring in Brahmins and other communities in general category, and BJP has surplus seats because they don't want to give seats to Muslims. So they are distributing and giving it to individual marginalized groups within the scheduled castes who are not who are not accommodated by Mayawati in her politics, and that's how the very idea of Hissedari, which was in some sense advocated by Kashiram in a particular manner, becomes a resource for BJP, because this has all kinds of resources, money and political resources, and that's how, in some sense, wealth politics stands today, and Bahujan in some sense is not really taking off. So I saw that I will 2 minutes more than.
I think please keep your questions ready, and I invite Sumit to make these